I was in Tokyo 6 days before the disaster struck. I then returned to Canada, and as this unfolded, I decided last week that I have to get back in there and do what I can to help, and so I'm leaving in 7 days from now with an idea of how I can be of assistance to the people right now.
What inspired you to do this?
In Japanese, we have a wonderful expression, Marshall. It is ongaishi. And I suppose the best way to translate that would be to repay kindnesses that have been shown to me. And in Japanese society, it's taken as a completely natural response to situations that you will immediately pay people back for what they've done to you, even if it's 20 years ago. And in my case, it's 37 years worth of payback time, because they have been a wonderful part of my life and continue to be. I've received so much from the people of this country over these close to 4 decades. And if there was any time now that I had to do the ongaishi, which is payback, well, it's certainly now. So I just couldn't miss the meaning of that. And so I made the decision last week, and we're all hot to trot now.
Excellent, excellent. And tell us a little bit about the preparations that you're making on that.
Welcome to Blog Talk Radio. If you
the idea,
please press 1 at any time, and you are now in the host.
I'm getting a welcome to Blog Talk Radio feedback loop in my ear right now. I don't know why that's happening. Can you hear that?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but I was getting the welcome to Blog Talk Radio feedback loop there for a second. I don't know why, but I'm fine now. Yeah, it's disappeared. The idea here, Marshall, is very simple. I do have a certain amount of influence in the society there because I'm a public speaker and a writer, and have used the media a lot in my years there. And so I want to do a project which I call Arise Japan, because what people need now more than anything else is hope and inspiration. Of course, supplies, water, food. There are plenty of other people doing that. But because I'm a foreigner, I have a unique ability here to get attention given to me simply because I'm not Japanese, and I do speak Japanese. So the plan is to do a series of talks and events starting in the southern island of Kyushu, where our listeners may know we've had some volcanic activity recently, for example. It's all part of this ring of fire lighting up, I believe. And what I want to do is get on a motorcycle and actually dramatize it by having a flag that has a Japanese sun symbol on it. That's their flag, which simply says in Japanese, Arise Japan. And so you're going to have this unusual-looking person on a motorcycle moving up the country, inching his way towards the disaster zone, collecting enough funds to keep myself going along the way, doing public lectures and talks. And at every talk, I'll have this massive black book, which is, let's call it the Book of Hope. And all of the people who come to these events will then write something in that book that is aimed to deeply inspire the people that it will finally be delivered to, who will be the people in the absolute center of the disaster area, whom I plan to personally hand it to as a gift of hope and say, here is what your fellow Japanese are saying about their desire to support you. Here are their drawings, their paintings, their ditties, their whatever people want to put in it. And among those people, hopefully, we'll have people from all walks of life, including very well-known people, and including Jimmy and Mary in the street. And it will be given to a representative, maybe a mayor or maybe a shopkeeper in one of the really devastated areas, just as a symbol that, hey, all of these people care, and they believe, as I do, that like the firebird, the hinotori in Japanese mythology, it will rebirth itself out of the ashes, and Japan will start anew. So Arise Japan is the name of the project, and that's how I want to carry it out.
Wow, this is so needed. You know, one of the things that I have been so profoundly inspired and impressed by is how the Japanese people, the whole nation, has dealt with this. We don't see all of the whining and complaining and finger pointing from the public. They're angry. They obviously have been getting a lot of the straight scoop. But I think the whole world has looked at it and said, God, if something like that happens here, I hope we have what it takes to respond to it as the Japanese are. I mean, they're really showing us how to cope with the catastrophe.
That's exactly what I think, Marshall. They have become the role model par excellence for the worst imaginable series of catastrophes that, no nightmare could cook up three like this. First earthquake, then tsunami, and then the threat of radioactive problems arising from the reactors, all of these coming one after another in very short succession. It's like getting a body blow, an uppercut, and then an invisible bogeyman from behind is coming at you, and that would be the radioactive fallout that people are talking about. So here we have an exemplar. So for me, the Japanese are heroes. I don't see them as victims. I see them as heroes because they're showing the way for what could very well be a scenario that is replayed in other countries as the Earth goes through her dramatic shifting that you and I both know has been a long time in the coming and now seems to be in high gear. So they are the model, the role model. And I know it's difficult for people to completely adopt a way of life and thinking that's taken them thousands of years of their society to get to, but we can be inspired. And let's say we're in a disaster and we're having a thought, maybe I'll just nip into that shop and just help myself to whatever. Maybe because of them, we'll go, wait a minute. Remember the Japanese, they didn't do that. They didn't start looting. They stayed in line. They didn't start screaming and yelling at their government should be doing this or that. That's the role model I think they are, and they can do it because they're Japanese, and they've had a long training to do that.
They've had a long training to do that, and but I've always been, Echan, and through all of the years that we've known each other, I've always been deeply impressed with the Japanese people, particularly in the topics of earth changes, catastrophism, Planet X, and 2012. And while I've appeared on national television here in the United States, the first time I ever appeared on national television anywhere was in Japan. And
That's right.
I've always been. That's right, and it was with you, and that show went into reruns, forever. I mean, it was almost like the next best thing to I Love Lucy. And but I don't know that we were that comedian, but particularly the topic, but the fact that I was really impressed by how the Japanese, they'll look at something, and if it's their cup of tea, if they're interested, they'll investigate it. And they do it in a very sober way. They just don't dive in, look for headlines, and dive out. And if it's not their cup of tea, they don't do what so many other people around the world will do, which is they get fearful and they get caustic and they say nasty things and they do whatever they can do to just suppress a conversation. They just simply say, "I'm not interested, thank you," and they walk off. Mm-hmm. And so I've always been impressed with the way the Japanese they come at things, and they have this incredible amount of tolerance. Where does this come from?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that you have an unbelievably high amount of people living on a very small geographical area. Japan is really a tiny country. And when you have that kind of density of population, it means that, let's say you want to go for a walk on the wild side. It's going to come back to you through the community of people that you're dealing with, which is a very strong social network. It's going to come back in your face very, very quickly. In other words, it's part of daily life to make sure that you keep your own stuff to yourself. Because if you start throwing it around at others, your anger, your displeasure, it will very soon come back through this almost telepathically linked network of densely populated people. It will come right back to you, and you will become very quickly a persona non grata in that society. They won't attack you. They won't badmouth you, but there will be a silent refusal, I think, in many cases, to allow you to fully be a part of the society anymore. So it is not in your interests to go out and do something that is going to be harmful to the community at large. So in that sense, it's a very telepathically linked, aware group of people who know that what's good for the group is actually good for the individual, which is something I don't think that we in the West have really got to, where we tend to stress our individuality. But you know, Marshall, the other day I was on another Blog Talk interview where we were praising the Japanese, and one thing that myself and the host both noticed, he's been there 23 years, for me it's closer to 40, was people think that Japanese are not so individualistic as Westerners, that they tend to be all the same, kind of a group consciousness. Nothing could be further from the truth.
They march in
They're
lockstep,
tremendous. Yeah, they're tremendously individualistic people, but they keep it to themselves, and they wait for the right opportunity to share their unique individuality in the correct situation where they're not going to be drowning everybody else out. So we have to explode that myth. They're highly individualistic. They're no different from you or me or anybody else, but they just keep it under wraps better. And that's what they're doing en masse now. They're keeping it under wraps. We need to learn how to do that. Yeah.
You have to do that. You know, as you were talking earlier about being ostracized for doing things that we just do commonly here in the West, did you ever see the movie Avatar? And
which movie was that, Marshall?
Did you ever see the movie Avatar?
Oh, of course I saw Avatar, yes.
Okay, remember that there was a great line, and they would, you know, if you were in favor with the people you cared about, you're in favor with your clan, they would see you. And then if you were out of favor, then they didn't see you. And it had nothing to do with the physical, as whether there was something within you, your depth, that was worth looking at. And it sounds to me that's a good parallel with Japanese culture and how they're facing these crises.
That's a very good parallel indeed. You know, in Japanese, we have the expression, you know, to have faith, or to save face, or to keep face. And of course, that's not a physical face, that's an inner face, which is a demonstration of your integrity as a human being. And that's exactly what you described in the Avatar film. We can see them because they're really present with their integrity. They're not hiding a whole bunch of stuff, the nasty stuff that they've done behind the scenes that they hope will never be revealed. It doesn't work like that in Japan, because it will come out much, much faster, and they will not be lauded by any member of the society there for doing something that everybody knows is just not right. For example, during this last disaster, there was a BBC reporter had gone into a shop and bought some bread, and the BBC reporter then left the shop. And of course, the shopkeeper was very stressed out from being in the disaster zone, and probably hadn't slept for a couple of days, and had overcharged the BBC reporter for the loaf of bread. I mean, something like $1. Well, after the reporter left, he went after him on his bicycle. He knew he was heading for the station, and he caught up with the BBC reporter at the station and gave him the $1 that he'd overcharged him because he was too stressed out to count right. I mean, go figure. Where else is that going to happen on the planet? For $1. The guy gets on his bicycle. He's already exhausted. And he does that because he would lose faith. He would lose faith. He would not be seen anymore like in the Avatar movie. He would become an invisible nobody because he had let his business down, let himself down, and more importantly, he'd let the customer down. That's what we're dealing with as a people here.
Wow. Wow, so this is not a situation here in the West where at some point, you know, we can be patient, and then finally we go, that tears it, you know, we're going down on the mat, I'm going to rip you a new one. I mean, you know, and we have that threshold issue where we just go nasty. And I mean, if being in a crisis, overcharging somebody $1 a loaf, and it's like, you know, here we'd probably, let him go or whatever. But this guy just was, he leaves his shop to go give him that $1. And it had nothing to do with the dollar. It had not, I mean, that's just an insignificant sum. It's being seen. It's that deeper thing. And this is why I'm really excited with what I'm going to be able to do here in following you as you go into Japan, and our listeners can follow you. I mean, this is, everything we see on TV is either it's language translated or culture translated or a combination of both. And Candy Crowley, nice gal, but I sure would like to hear somebody else, you know?
Yeah, well, this is what I'd like to be a truly embedded reporter, and I am looking for Western press, and I'm so glad you're there to help me to start off with this. People who can get on a story of me just having conversations with regular people who are both inside the zone and outside the zone, how they really feel. You know, I mean, 4 days ago, I was emailing a friend of mine who is in the banking business, a very aware young man, could feel it coming, knew that it was part of a larger evolutionary movement in his understanding on the Earth. But even him, a few days ago, he said, you know, we really took a heavy blow to the head here, and we're having a hard time getting back on our feet. We understand that people are praying for us, and we really appreciate that. But right now, I just don't know how we're going to fare. That was right in the middle of the time last week when the people of Tokyo were concerned about radioactive exposure. The Earth was still shaking. I've been talking to people on the phone while they're going through what we think is an aftershock, is a 6.2. I mean, that's a major earthquake itself. And we're having a conversation. Yeah. And so he was saying, you know, we need more than prayers. And it was then I thought, okay, they do need more than prayers. They need action. From everybody who can perform actions in whatever way that will help to do what? To bring this magical concept called hope, which is the most ineffable, difficult thing to define. How do you actually create a feeling of hope in a dire situation like this? That's what's called for, and you know, my contribution is tiny. But everybody who wants to find a way to provide hope, not just gleeful talk about it's going to be okay. No, it has to be more concrete than that. It has to be something that has some meaning and depth, which is difficult to create, and that it will be a challenge for me because, you know, there'll be people saying it's all right for you, you're a foreigner, but we have to live here and rebuild our lives, and I'm going to have to come up with a way of inspiring them that, no, there is hope because you are Japanese, and this culture has been around a long time, and you've produced stunning energy throughout your history, and that's what's going to carry you. It's not the physical stuff, the money, it's not that that's going to help here. It's a rebirth of their national consciousness of who they really are, and they're a very spiritual people, and they've forgotten that during these years of incredible economic progress.
So this is really something where this is a very spiritual, but not a theological spiritual. This is something deeper, even more profound than that. It goes to an existential level, that there is a basic connection, and that it's not about those of us outside of the disaster zone saying, here's what we're going to do for you. And then they're wondering on that end, yeah, is it going to get here? And if it does, when? This is more person to person and us saying to them, we care, you are not alone. And
that's the key word.
Yes. You are not alone. It's a simple message, but it's, you know, how do you believe, because I know you're planning right now, and I think next week you're going to be flying out, and how do you believe, having lived in Japan for several decades and been a very successful author there, you're still a very successful author and you're a TV personality, you know, and you're the only fellow that can speak perfect Japanese and stand in front of an audience in a kilt. So, and that was one of the great things about you. But how do you think they're going to, when you come with this book, with all of the signatures and all of the little pictures and what people are saying and doing, how do you think those folks on the ground are going to respond to that?
That's going to be the challenge. I believe that the people who write in the book, I'm going to actually create events where we can probably sit quietly for a while, and we can really get to that place inside of ourselves where we can actually locate what is a hopeful message, what is a message that will really carry to the people's hearts. And therefore, I hope to create a book. I hope to create a book of sincere feelings that are expressed in such a way that the book is simply a representation. It's part one. That it could go into a series of books about us simply supporting each other through positive affirmations, through tales of individual deeds that have been done. It's already happening. I'm seeing the Japanese people already have got over the first wave of incredible angst about this. They're rallying, and they're beginning to realize now, the people that I'm talking about are beginning to realize, hey, it's not about things anymore and about having a good job and about having this much money and having a Gucci bag or whatever. It's much, much more important now for us to find that place inside of us that is spiritual. Now, you said that very well. It's not a theological thing. And in The Last Samurai, Tom Cruise had a great line. He was in the village where he had been captured by the rebel samurai, and he was watching them. He was watching them go about their daily business, practicing martial arts, meditating, cooking, doing everything with care and attention. And he said, well, I'm not a Bible man, but, you know, these are not religious people. They don't seem to have a religion. They seem to have something different. And the only thing I can call it is spiritual. And, you know, no Japanese will think of themselves as being a religious person. And they probably wouldn't even think of themselves as being spiritual. And I think the very fact that they're not hooked up to a major established religious system where they all think the same, they're not hooked up to such a system, although there are Buddhists and, you know, there is Shinto and there are Christians. We know that. But the average Japanese does not think like that. They just have a sense of what it is to be a decent human being. And surely that is the basis of any spiritual system. Be a decent human being. The golden rule, don't do to other people what you wouldn't want them to do to you. I mean, that's spirituality right there. You don't have to go to a church or a temple or a mosque. And they are in the position now to express that spirituality with each other and go beyond the materialistic phase of their country, because rebuilding this just materially is not going to be enough. They have to rebuild their hearts and their souls. And that is a huge task that no government can really help them with. That's person-to-person interaction. And I'm just one of the people who's going to have that kind of interaction with individuals and small groups who already are saying to me, we cannot believe that you're actually going to come back for us now and help. When all of the other foreigners are leaving in droves, you're doing a U-turn. And just that is for us phenomenal. Thank you so much. And I haven't done anything yet.
Yeah, I know. And you know something, on this side of the Pacific, you know, I see you as one of the bravest men I know, if not the bravest. Others would look at you and say, hey, Echan, you're one can short of a six-pack. You know.
Well, I am, too.
Well, that's because I snitched it. But
you know, my
but you know they're going to do that.
My biggest concern was my wife. When I mentioned this to my daughter, who's here in Canada, where I am now, with my wife and my granddaughter and the whole family, my daughter's first reaction was, Dad, you know, what about Mom? So I broached it with her. You know, I'm actually going to go back in and do this, expecting her to react with, no. And she's Japanese. She said,
right.
Of course that's what you have to do. Of course that's what you have to do. Get moving. So, all right. Now I got the okay. I'm going. That was the most difficult part of all. So I have the family's blessing, and the idea is now growing so that through my Japanese blogs, I'm just putting out the word. For example, I need transportation. I would like to do it on a motorcycle to kind of express that we know gasoline is short right now. Rather than moving around on trains, if I'm moving around on a motorcycle with a flag, and I'll probably have an emblem on my leather jacket which says "Arise Japan," you know, then the Japanese are going to think this guy really is crazy, right? Which will draw attention. And like, who are you with this flag saying "Arise Japan, Jimmy"? And I'll get off my motorcycle and say, well, actually, and I'll talk in Japanese, and then they'll go, oh, wow, you speak Japanese? Yeah, actually, I've been here for a long time, and start a conversation, and, you know, one by one. And my model for this, in a sense, Marshall, is Peace Pilgrim, who was your country's greatest peace activist, and all she did was walk around America. She walked around America with a tunic which said Peace Pilgrim. That's all she did. She didn't have a political program, an agenda. She didn't have anything except her body and a tunic which said Peace Pilgrim. And people would stop her in the street and they go, well, who are you? What are you doing? And she'd say, I'm just walking the roads of America for peace. And that would instigate a conversation, and then they would listen, and they would start thinking, well, what is peace? And she did that for 25 years and influenced millions of people. She was penniless. Now, if one old woman can do that, all over America, then one slightly younger man can certainly do it in Japan. She's the peace pilgrim that inspired me.
Well, in terms of American folklore, it's like Johnny Appleseed and the story about this guy that just walked the earth in America and was throwing apple seeds around. I mean, that's the story, that as it goes. But it's the same kind of thing here, where you're just going to go out and connect with these people. And, yeah, there are other folks, governments and NGOs, and they're rolling up, and they're going to be going out and helping these folks. But what you're doing is bringing them that intangible something that you just can't slap in the back of a C-5A Galaxy and drop. Something that's person to person.
Yeah, it's person to person. I also do have a specific plan to offer my services as a volunteer interpreter, though. That was plan number one. And I know that it's difficult to get into the disaster zone because, of course, the government has to create cordons. They know that many people want to help. They don't want to have an inrush of 1,000 people going, I will help, but there's no place for them to stay. There's no food for them. They'll just be an extra burden. They already have many groups from many countries in there digging through the rubble, helping people. They have the Red Cross. They have all of that. I understand that. They need to control the input of people. So I actually went to one of the highest sources I have and got a connection with the wife of an ex-Japanese prime minister, whose name I will not share right now, and said, could you please get me a special pass as a volunteer interpreter to work with rescue squads, because I know that they don't speak Japanese. I know they're going to be in situations there with the local people where they cannot communicate properly. There will be misunderstanding. There will be potential trouble there. All I want to do is to get in there and be assigned to a rescue squad, and I'll be the interpreter. And I thought, surely the ex-prime minister's wife can come up with a special pass. And she wrote me back an email and said, I can't even get in there right now, she said. I want to go in and help. But only specific groups that are sanctioned by the government can get in. And at that point, I realized it's not going to be as easy as I thought. So I thanked her for telling me that, but I also sent her an email saying, I understand. She had said to me, just send us your prayers. And I said, no, I'm not just going to send you my prayers, because I believe in spiritual activism, and I believe that you have to put your body on the line, and prayers will help, but it's not enough. So if I have to go in under the wire and do it in a guerrilla tactics fashion, I will. Because you can't stop one guy getting in through all those roads that go into the disaster area, especially if you're on a motorcycle and you got a helmet on. They don't even know you're a foreigner. I could be the delivery guy. Get in there if I have to, without permission. That's how I want to do it.
Wow. So you're really going to get in there and do it to it. So right now, what are you doing with your preparations? When are you going to be leaving Canada for Japan? And how are we going to be able to follow your progress?
That's a good question. After I did a documentary film called The Earth Pilgrims, as you know, and had the idea that I would create a second documentary called Sea Pilgrims. And the idea was to kayak down the west coast of British Columbia and at one point cross the open sea to the Queen Charlotte Islands, which is 80 nautical miles, basically in a rowing boat with another guy. And that really was an insane idea, because it's one of the wildest stretches of ocean on the whole west coast up here, and you know, it's suicidal. And thankfully somebody stopped me. But while I was thinking about that, my daughter said, Dad, I'm worried. I'm going to give you a GPS special transceiver that guys out at sea can use so that they can always be tracked. And I still have that. So I'm going to activate that before I leave, find out how you hook that up to the internet so that it's obvious where I am in Japan and on the way to anybody who's connected to that system. So that's the first part of it. Secondly, I'll be updating my Japanese and English blogs on a daily basis with video material, photographic material, short ditties in English and Japanese about what's going on. And as I move along, the support system in Japan will grow, fractally expanding, so that other Japanese bloggers and people with communications networks can put the word out, so that we have an ongoing organic situation here where we're in communication, and I can find a way to communicate with you through radio. I can get internet connections to maybe not exactly in the center of the disaster zone. I don't know how the internet is working there right now, but there are plenty of ways that we can keep in touch. And I'd love to be able to inform your listeners of what is going on, and actually have Japanese people on the show with me, and I can translate on the spot with, Mr. Tanaka, who's just lost his house, his boat, and his livelihood, and hopefully nothing else, and see what he's thinking about the situation, and then maybe we can elicit some feedback from your listeners, and maybe they'll get inspired to help in their own individual ways, so that we just fractally grow this network, and it should work.
Excellent, excellent. So this is really going to be, from the ground up. This is a grassroots approach. You're the point man. You're the tip of the spear, so to speak. You're the one going out there. You're putting yourself at risk. Your wife, your family, they're very brave. I'm sure that on one hand, they're very proud and supportive of what you're doing, and on the other hand, you're going into harm's way. That's got to be deeply troubling for them.
Yes, indeed, but I think we are now at the point in our history on this planet, we're at the point where everything seems to be heading into chaos. Right now we've got a new situation in Libya which could go sideways any moment. We don't know when the next earthquake is going to happen or where. And so I think within this year, my sense of it is we're going to have much more of a need for individual response, and more families will have people like me around doing things like this, probably than ever before. And so we're all in it together, and we're all the tips of many spears here. And it just requires, I suppose, a feeling of it's better to do some action than to sit at home and watch the TV. You'll feel better about yourself, and you may be of some assistance. So I think it's timely, and I hope that more of us can do it.
Question I have is what people in Tokyo, the major cities, are thinking is it's similar to, what happens here is we'll see something happen. We see a major earthquake or, a Katrina, and these things happen to someone else, somewhere else. And so here in the West, we see that in knee-jerk sensitivity, go on Red Cross, donate $10 or $20, feel better about it, and then go back and watch daytime television. And in Japan, is this how the folks in Tokyo and the other major cities that are not directly in the path of this, though eventually they could face a severe radiation threat, how are they feeling about it in terms of the folks that you've been talking about in your dialogue? I know you were in Japan and actually returned home just a few days before this. And by the way, one thing we want to talk about is why you did, because of your research that you're doing. But how do the people in Tokyo look at what's happening to their countrymen beyond that, beyond just the knee-jerk sympathy level?
Well, this is what I really need to find out, because it's changing by the moment. It really is changing by the moment. There's such a telepathically connected culture of people that I think they're all looking at each other too, to find out how the others are reading the situation. And if I was the leader of a country where people are this linked up, my main concern would be to avoid panic at all costs. Now, I know the Japanese government has come under some criticism for its response to the situation, but I'm sure their main prerogative was we must not over-alarm the people, because when you get 30 million people, and that's how many we're talking about in the greater Tokyo area, that's the population of Canada almost, right? If you get a telepathic reaction of fear going through 38 million people, and they somehow unthinkably cross the threshold and the herd instinct takes over, then you're looking at a disaster far, far worse than anything that's happened so far, which would be literally the meltdown of the glue that holds the society together. Now, that is not going to happen, I'm absolutely sure. It would have happened by now if it was going to happen. And I think that the government did the very best that they could under an extremely difficult and trying set of circumstances. So my reading is that they're now looking at each other and going, we know it's going to be a different future now. We're going to have blackouts. I mean, just think of it. I believe that 30% of the power source for Tokyo came from those reactors, which are now toast. So where are we going to get this energy from? How are we going to do our industry here? What's going to happen to the economy? Well, we're just going to have to invent new things, and I bet they will. I bet they'll find a way to invent things that make that energy source available from something we haven't invented yet, and they're going to pull together as they did before. So I'm going to get that reading from them. And I'm sure amongst the people it will be very individualistic too. There'll be some people who just sit back and fall into hopelessness. As you would understand, no more jobs, the economy is cracked and ailing. Where we're going to get our light source from? All of these problems are about to unfold, and meanwhile, we haven't really understood how big the disaster was, because still haven't got to many of the villages affected. So it's ongoing. It's present continuous tense, and that's why I need to be there also to report on this to the West, and also report to the Japanese about what feedback I'm getting from the West, so I can have a kind of a multiple job description there, and hopefully carry it out.
Okay. Do you feel, you had mentioned before that, you know, there is this possibility that there could be a panic contagion, the best way to, I guess, explain it, where at some point, because all of these people are so socially interlinked, and we have seen the power of social linkages. Look what's happening in the Middle East. I mean, Twitter and Facebook revolts. And that's really what it is. It's hungry people with Twitter and Facebook, and that's what it boils down to. And we have, as you pointed out earlier, you know, the situation in Libya, which we don't know where that goes. But in looking at the Japanese people, as you know them from living there and working there for decades, and let's talk about that contagion point, that social point where everybody, you know, I guess the best thing to, there was a great scene from a movie many years ago with Billy Crystal, and he's on vacation, and he steps out of his tent with a little electric coffee grinder and starts a whole herd of cattle running like crazy and just tears up the whole place. And when I think about this, are the Japanese more or less susceptible to this herd panic than other cultures? Just,
well, I think
yeah,
I think that they are less susceptible to it because there's a lot more contingent upon that happening than where we are. And what I mean by that is because it's an interconnected society, they simply afford to do that, and they know it. Deep down inside, they know that button must not be switched, even though the herd instinct is coming on, you know, at 100 decibels, they will resist it. And if they were going to do it, as I said, they would have done it already. You would have seen it already. They've gone through the worst trial already. So I don't think that's going to happen. There isn't going to be that kicking in. They're less susceptible to it, perhaps, than in other places where the individual passion can stir up emotions much, much more than in Japan. People are just not going to voice that. It's a no-no. They all know that's the no-no. We got too many people.
That's
too much at risk. We got to keep our cool.
Yeah.
Under all of the worst situation, we got to keep our cool, and they're proving that they can do it. So I have every confidence in the continued ability to do that. What disturbs me is not them keeping their cool. What disturbs me is how they're going to quickly find a new paradigm, a new way of carrying on Japan now that she has been so severely injured. And realistically, I mean, the damage hasn't even begun to be calculated here. And, you know, the economic ramifications, et cetera, et cetera. So I think many people now are thinking, well, how do I want to live my life now as a Japanese? Not just my job, not just, you know, my social connections, but my whole way of being. How am I going to live as a different kind of person, having learned from this disaster? And I believe that what you'll see then is an opposite form of contagion, a positive contagion, where they all rally together. As you said, you've got Twitter and Facebook and all of these fantastic living organisms to connect people. They're going to come up with something that hasn't been invented yet in terms of a new societal consciousness, a new way of being. And in a sense, they will perhaps be a role model for post-disaster cultures that we will all wonder at in years to come. And I think that's revolutionary and exciting and amazing, and I want to be part of it. I have my own personal reasons for being there too. I want to be part of the revolution, just as if I had been Egyptian and I'd been living in London, I would have wanted to be back there in that square and be part of it because it's history being made. It's something new. And that's the excitement and the passion I feel about being on the front line, to be part of what I see as a truly spiritual revolution that has nothing to do with religion at all. It's a revolution of the heart, how we feel about life and love and the universe.
So then this catastrophe, and we really can only speculate as how this is going to roll out, although it's obviously going to be significant, not only for Japan, but because Japan is a major industrial nation, one of the few in the world, it's going to have downstream impacts for everyone everywhere else. And we're going to feel that as well. And I mean, there's already where, you know, different forms of manufacturing are closed down. If you're a videographer or you're a photographer, this has got to be an immediate concern because Japan is, that's it. If you want video and you want film and you want these cameras, you go to Japan to get it. You know, yeah, you can get Leicas and they're bloody expensive, but everybody gets these other brands. Well, these plants are shutting down. Now, then the real issue then with that comes is what happens when the skilled craftsman, you know, grinding lenses is an art form, and particularly on the high end, on the consumer stuff, it's all machines. But you start losing these skilled workers. They start drifting off and finding other ways to do things. Do you see that in this cultural rebirth that still is nebulous, still has no shape or form, but it is one that takes Japan a big step away from the consumerism that dominates the world right now? You know, it's just, you know, we got a Walmart view of existence. And people are going to say, no, there's more to it than that. Life is too precious for that. But then again, that has for everybody else that's still in the consumer cycle and the capitalists that feed that, that's going to have consequences there as well. Have you got some initial thoughts on that?
I like the Walmart view of the world statement. I was walking down one of Tokyo's most prosperous neighborhoods, Omotesando, which is like the Champs-Élysées in France. And as I walked through the literally thousands of people out Sunday shopping or window shopping, I was walking against the throng because I was going in the opposite direction. And as I threaded my way through them, I was videoing and talking on my iPhone, and I was saying, I wonder how many of these people here today can feel the incoming wave of transformation, because I could feel it even then. Possibly due to the fact that I was teaching remote viewing, which tends to make you more intuitive, and also in relation to an earlier question you had, I had been rigorously checking what was going on with solar wind speed, sunspot activity, and so on. And so I knew that we were due for something. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to join the dots there if you're doing your research. So it was obvious that something was coming. I had already planned to leave on the 6th of March anyway. That was just pure synchronicity. But I certainly felt it coming, and they did too at a deep level. They could feel these tremors coming because, you know, they are intuitive. But, you know, nobody wants to talk about that. And so my question to
let me talk about that. Let me talk about that, all right? Because you brought that intuitive point up. Is, you know, in doing a decade of work on earth changes, global warming, space threats and the such, you do, through doing the work, become sensitized to things that you normally wouldn't otherwise. And one of the things that I began developing a sensitivity to was this deep-rooted sense of premonition, a sense of knowing, if you will, that a major event would happen somewhere in the world. And for me, it's experience is I get a burr under my saddle. Something is deeply troubling me, but yet I can never put a thumb on it. It's never anything connected with my life or what's going on. It can hit me when I've got problems or not problems, but I never feel that sense of focus or connection to something specific. And then when I just stop and I get quiet and I acknowledge, I just say, okay, I get it, something big and some big cataclysm is going to happen somewhere in the world, and it's going to be within the next 2 to 4 weeks. I get it. And the minute I acknowledge it, that frustration that the premonition gives me begins melting away, and within an hour, I'm well over it and I'm not having those feelings. I've had that before the Sumatra superquake, all right, 2004. I had it before Katrina. I had it before Haiti. All right, I've had it in other times, but also I had it before this. And so actually about 3 weeks ago, I knew that something major was going to happen. So this is, from my standpoint, I mean, let's be honest, scientists are going to say if I can't stick a thermometer up your kazoo, it doesn't exist. But I felt it. I felt it, and so did you. And so did anyone else comment to you that they had this growing sense of premonition?
Well, you see, in Japan, because they're so used to earthquakes and typhoons and all kinds of disasters, it is a subject that's very delicate. And while I was there, I had specifically targeted certain friends, and I sat them down, and I said, it's coming. It's not going to be too long. Do you have a plan B? Let's start thinking about plan B if the worst case scenario happens. And while they were polite enough to entertain me with, okay, we can think about this and that, nobody was really in the frame of mind of, I'm going to find a way out of this country, for example, and move to safer shores. That just wasn't in anybody's program at all, because that, for them, would be seen as a betrayal of their own culture and their own country. So I believe that just about everybody at some level felt this coming, and they managed to cover it over with many layers of don't want to go there, because we've had to deal with so much so far with the economy, with other disasters, the Kobe earthquake and so on. Don't want to go there. If it happens, we'll deal with it, but otherwise we don't want to think too much about it. So that was the general response. I believe that many people were feeling, like me and you were feeling that, but unlike them, perhaps people like me and you are joining the dots and seeing it as part of a much larger transformation that is actually solar system galactic wide. And that was what I was trying to communicate with people, is it's not just a local thing. Don't take it personally here. Nobody's got it in for Japan. It's everywhere from now on is going to start experiencing this kind of disaster. And that's not a negative scenario imagination at all. It's totally realistic if you join the dots. We are seeing more and more activity, and volcanoes are starting to go off in Japan. People are saying to me, well, we've been waiting for Mount Fuji to go for hundreds of years, and the seismic activity around the bottom of Mount Fuji is perhaps suggestive that it doesn't stop here. And funnily enough, you talked about dreams and premonitions, Marshall. The great director, Kurosawa, had made a film called Dreams, and in that film, he had a scene of nuclear power stations melting down along with an earthquake and the blowing up of the top of Mount Fuji. So there's a premonition if I ever saw one. Not just a film scenario, I think. He was a very sensitive man. So more and more people will get dreams and premonitions, such as you've often covered in your work. Very important to pay attention to these subtle feelings, sudden malaise and headaches, and I need to take a nap, and why don't I have the drive today? There's nothing should be wrong with me, like you said. But as soon as you admit, okay, something's up here, and I admit it, I see it, and then it seems to go, as if the environment is demanding your attention to not deny anymore, to not go into self-denial anymore about what's happening. And I think if we become more open to that, we'll become more fluid and more flexible, and we'll become more intuitive, and we'll be much more able to handle these situations as they exponentially increase, and I think they will.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a major shift in world paradigm, particularly in the industrial countries, where instead of, the focus being on, return on investment and dividends, and we're looking at all of these synthetic systems of measuring success, whereas we start to go in a different direction where we're saying, is this survivable? Is this renewable? Is this safe? And those become the transcendent issues as opposed to just, what's Wall Street doing today?
I agree entirely. I think the way that information is being released right now around the world, the truth about our financial systems, how our corporations really work, there is a lot of information coming out, and it's not just coming out from the areas that have received a lot of attention in the news recently, WikiLeaks, for example. It's all over. It's rampant. People are awakening to the fact that we need to find a new model for life on this planet. And the key word, of course, is sustainable. But I think an even more important word here is spiritual. If you want to be truly sustainable, you have to have a spiritual relationship with the rest of the environment. The environment doesn't stop with the Earth. It doesn't stop with the solar system. The larger environment is the entire universe. And we are connected to the entire universe as fractal beings. That's what we really are. As above, so below. You got trouble in the heavens, you're going to have trouble down here below, and vice versa. So I think that's the paradigm that's called for. I think that the industrial age is well and nigh over. We don't have enough left on this planet to make any more widgets and sell them to other people. And it's astounding how many countries, leaders, don't get that. As if we could carry on producing for the next 5 decades, happily selling it to whom? Using what?
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, it's perpetual la, 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 la. Well, listen, I'm looking over here in the virtual studio, and I see we have someone who wants to come on and open up. So I'm just going to open them up. We'll just see who they are. And there we go. Caller, you're on the line.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
What's your name, sir?
My name is Tom Livesey, and, I'm enjoying your conversation. I'm also a Blog Talk, talk show host. And I did a show this past Friday that has gone ballistic, and it was about situations, and I don't want to take over your show, but it was about a mother who hadn't seen her son, who is in the military, on an Air Force base in Japan, and the limitation of the communication that she's had, with him, hadn't heard from him, in weeks, and the communication is limited, just like your host is, talking about. And she's, trying to, because he was scheduled to come back to America, this next week in March. And as an American, I'm a former stockbroker, investment banker, and had to, reinvent myself. I'm now a news editor for over a dozen news sites, including CNN, and it was about trying to bring the story home. And until we hear about Americans involved in situations and the traumas that's going on over there, we just say, that's a third world, country, and but when you say there's 13 Americans, sunk in that ship, or 13, Americans or whatever, that kind of brings the story home. But what I want to, comment and ask you, and just listen in to your show. Thank you all for doing the show, first off, and thank you all for bringing it home. Okay, there are two things I want to ask you. And my majors was marketing and finance. Okay, I was just one of the youngest stockbrokers in Georgia on Wall Street. Lost about 40 of my trainers, friends, when I trained them at 9/11, because as a stockbroker, you had to be at your computer, your workstation, 1 hour before Wall Street opened every day, and that was 9 o'clock. So obviously 8 o'clock, 9/11. 2001, the stockbrokers that I trained, and I know them as friends, we're up on the top floor, John Fitzgerald, to name one, and the only crime they made that day was showing up on time, and obviously the planes, hit the towers and whatnot. What I want to ask, both of you, and I'll shut up, is that the tremors. Now, I did, attend Georgia State marketing double majors, marketing finance, and I did take geology as an elective. I thought that was going to be an easy, course, but it kind of made me, and this is what we were talking about, the Earth cleanses itself every hundreds and thousands of years, whether or not they're human beings or not. The thing is that the Earth, the plate tectonics that are going on, there are faults, and when there's an earthquake that happened this past week, it's going to shift the planet core. And I want to ask you, do you all anticipate, like you're all talking about, your thoughts of premonition, do you think that we're going to, not look and see some kind of shift, some kind of other earthquake that might not be in Japan, or maybe the faults of California, or maybe on down in the south, hemisphere, due to this major earthquake catastrophe? And I will stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are we going to see more?
You want to take that first?
Yeah, I think that the short answer. The short answer is yes. I have seen some very interesting maps of the Ring of Fire. And if you look at the Ring of Fire, which is, of course, the Pacific Ocean with the Americas on one side and Asia on the other side, you'll see a pattern emerging where the earthquake activity started in Chile, if you look down at the bottom right of that image you have of the Ring of Fire, it then moved across to where? To New Zealand on the other side, and then it warped up to Japan, higher up on the left side of the Pacific Ring. And so if you think of that as being a system of tectonic plates moving each other, that seems to be a clockwise movement there, isn't there? You're going from New Zealand, you're going Chile across to New Zealand, and then you're going up to Japan. Well, where would you move to next? Of course, it would be the other side of the Pacific, where I have children living, on the coast of British Columbia. So I think it's logical to assume, and you don't have to be a geologist and an expert in plate tectonics to look at the movement so far, how it seems to be linked, and how it would be fairly logical to conclude that the next place it's going to happen is going to be somewhere along the west coast of North America. That's what I would say. How about you, Marshall? Marshall, have we lost our host?
I will agree.
Sorry about that.
Well, listen, I am a talk show host, so let me go ahead and step in. Marshall, I'm not taking over the show, but yes, you're exactly right. Okay.
Marshall,
yes,
where are you?
Unmuting of the mic ceremony.
Okay, you're back. Okay, so did you hear that last part?
Oh yeah,
did you hear the last part?
The headset. Yes,
so,
I heard all that.
What do you think?
And,
what do you think?
Well, just so I can tell the caller, I just recently published a book, Crossing the Cusp, Surviving the Edgar Casey Pole Shift. And there was a crop circle appeared in 2008 in Mayberry. It was nearly the size of 3 soccer fields. And what it shows is that, and it's very elaborate, it took me like 50 panels to just break it down, but it's all consistent and coherent. And it's showing that we have an interloper that's coming through the system, and this is what's getting things all fired up. So we know that, for example, solar warming is on the increase. We've had physicists go on, like Dr. Michio Kaku, to me, is really heroic in this, because he's saying, hey, the solar max is, we were off by a factor of 20. I mean, that's the difference between an X-class and a Y-class flare. And you don't want to get hit by other, but a Y-class is like Poseidon's Adventure, okay? So this is something where if we were in the crosshairs of a flare event like that, you go to ground. But where does all that solar radiation go? I mean, it goes down into the planet. We're like a big tea kettle. So I can see that we have all of this increasing seismicity in the world. One thing I am not hearing on television now with the talking heads, or what I call them, the news entertainers, we don't have reporters anymore, is that they're not saying, well, this is just a perception issue. These things always happen about the same thing, and it's, we're just noticing them more because we're talking about them more and we're tweeting and whatnot. Nonsense. You go and you look at the databases and you can see that major events, we're seeing a very clear uptick. And all you have to do is just look at, think back. Yeah, the biggest one that hit was decades ago in Alaska. But, this compression of time between these major catastrophic events is what I'm seeing as a researcher. So instead of these things happening, years apart or decades apart, you have weeks, months, maybe a year. The cycle is shrinking down, and this is consistent with Dr. Michio Kaku's warning. What he's saying is that the solar maximum is going to be really intense, and it's going to have the possibility of taking down huge sections of our power grids. And I'm not talking about for a few days or a week. What he's talking about, and the Academy of Sciences is talking about, is that these storms could be so violent they could take down, a good portion of the U.S. power grid for several months, 6, 7, 8 months. And it's going to go in, blow out transformers, and it takes time to rebuild these things. So there's really a clarion call for everybody, and I think with Japan looking at it, if you say, well, gee, it's an isolated thing, or the old, it's just a coinky-dink. Well, this is one coinky-dink that comes on the heels of Chile and Haiti and other coinky-dinks. And, the difference between what is happening in Japan and what's happened elsewhere is really driven not by the size of the events, which are sizable, but by how people prepare for these kinds of things. So if you look in Chile, they had an earthquake that if it had hit many other places around the Ring of Fire, the death toll would have been astronomical. But it was a low death toll because in Chile, they know to live and prepare for these things. Japan, they know. It's just that this plant was not ready for a double whammy. And I see now what we're learning the hard way is, yes, as the caller was pointing out, the Earth, things go through cycles. And a lot of this technology that we have in the world was designed during a period of relative quiescence, when we weren't having such a compression in the scale of global catastrophes. And what we're seeing quintessential example of with the power plant in Japan was that when they built that in the 70s, they just simply could not imagine a superquake and a tsunami hitting back to back. But if that plant were built today, they would keep that in mind. The more modern plants, yes, they're looking at these worst case scenarios. So we're finding out the hard way where our world paradigm is failing us. And rather than pointing fingers at people and saying they're just evil and greedy and whatever, I think it's more important for us to say, well, we have the fabric of our lives, which was constructed during a time of relative quiescence. And that's what is happening in our solar system and with our planet right now. And we need to get with that. We need to get ahead of that curve instead of getting these ugly reminders. So that's my take on it.
Can I interject?
More. Yep.
Can I interject two things? And I'm going to let you know, you all just, it's great to listen to you. But the whole point was, and we're talking about communication, and the lines might be down for other individuals' communication. And my show was about Mama, I'm Coming Home, okay? And it was about these military kids out there. He's 23 years old. I hadn't seen his mom in 3 years. But there are just, all wars from, the beginning to man. It was probably a mama saying, son, you take care of yourself, and we want you back, and don't get hurt because you got grass to cut when you get back. The thing is that communication, what we talked about is that this is what drives a soldier through his, maybe a critical wound because, and guess what, in Vietnam or anywhere else, in Korea, is many of the soldiers, and as a matter of fact, I had a general on my show who said that his, the only thing with his driving points was his mama, his thoughts of his mama coming home. And this is what drives people. And guess what? The last thing, maybe a military, you saw your partner at your platoon getting blown up. The last thing he said, and you couldn't do anything about it, he said, "Mama, Mama." He's calling his mama. So you don't really need communication when you have that driving force. The general really consoled the mothers. We had moms of the military on the show. But then also you had the other particular speaker tonight talking about the spiritual situation. It's all about universal love. Okay, and why we go to college and why we do this is because of love that we have for our fellow man. And with that being said, there are going to be issues that are going on. Japan is hit with a tsunami, earthquake, a tsunami. Now the nuclear situation that they are faced. There were nuclear plants that were closed down a couple of years ago, but they came out of that because they came up not with increasing the ability to handle more a situation like a earthquake of this magnitude, because they couldn't have foreseen about that. But moreover, they came up with a secondary plan. Now, how can you come up and how can you finalize, how can you actually know what your secondary backup plan is without it going into a catastrophe like it is today? So what I'm saying is that the love that we have, the economics that we're going to be faced with, and the Toyota #1 auto plant in the world, it used to be, the inventory was right next to their manufacturing plant, but then it was like a need to have situation. So they had their plants and their, actual, material or parts that they needed, in a distant location. Now the roads, cities are underwater, or, they're not able to get to them. We're going to see as a whole nation, and if you have, like I'm talking to you on the phone, any kind of chip, or you're looking on a computer, battery in your watch, car, the products and situations that we have that we depend on, is going to start making everything relative. As a matter of fact, and I'm going to close with this, the iPhones have a 5-week, delay to get your iPhone. from AT&T. These delays are going to be happening for just getting, a car battery. These delays are going to start to make a real impact on our, U.S. economy. But I want to tell you guys, I will just shut up now and thank you for doing a show like this. But it's a lot that most of us, and I'm glad I just listened to your show, because most of Americans, we got our neck in the sand. We're worried about our own problems, okay? And this is what what you're talking about is that my goodness, I hate what's going on over there. Ooh, anyway, but, now they're going on down the road. But guess what? It's going to eventually creep up into, just like the other gentleman, I can't recall his name, is talking about when it gets to the West Coast, when it comes to America, who's going to be coming to our rescue? But it's something that the earth is going to cleanse itself, and it's going to be either through a flood or whatever. And earthquakes and tsunamis and whatnot, but it's about, identifying where we are. And Omega, a Spanish philosopher, is identifying yourself as a speck on the universe. And this is what we are, because the earth was going to blow us off either way, okay?
Well, you got a good point there. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to respond to that as, before I started my publishing business, I was in computers, and we were working on Y2K. Now, it was a millennium bug. And, of course, it's the news entertainers love to use it as a hackney thing. Matter of fact, Michio Kaku was terribly humiliated by a news entertainer on Fox who said, 2012 solar maximum, that's just Y2K. And that's what he said. Well, I worked in Y2K, and I worked on the part of the internet. I did a substantial contract for Hewlett-Packard in documenting the key area that was really causing all of these companies to really worry about what could happen. And, airplanes falling out of the sky, nuclear reactors exploding because of the bug, that was all trumped up by gold dealers. They were just using it to sell coins. Here's what was really bothering everybody. Imagine you go to the store, you're going to buy a box of cornflakes. You scan it in. By the time you put it in your car, get it to the house, open the box, pour it out, put some milk in, and start going crunch, crunch, crunch. There's been a conversation of maybe a dozen different computers going from that scanner to the back office, to the branch office, to this office, to jobbers and distributors and wholesalers, and all the way back to the Kellogg's company or whoever made the cornflakes. And before you take your first mouthful, they know that they need to increment production by one box to replace what you took off the shelf. Now, this is all automated. Computers talking to computers without humans being involved. And the result of this is what's called just-in-time. Now, before computers, Kellogg's and other manufacturers knew that they had to have 90 days, 3 months of product out into the supply chain, because in a manual system, it's this huge inefficient slinky, all right? And you have to be able to pick it up, because location is everything in retail. You lose your shelf space, it could take you months to get it back. You spend a fortune to get it back. It's cheaper to stock the inventory to make sure you don't. With computers, all of a sudden they said, hey, we can cut these inventory costs with just-in-time. We don't have 90 days, we have 90 hours. And go back and look at pictures of grocery stores in the 60s and the 50s before computers kicked into gear. And the first thing you notice is that the shelves in the stores never went above eye level. Matter of fact, they were just a little bit low, and they weren't heavily stocked like they are, because the stores today are really retail warehouses. And that's why they're so heavily packed, because there's this small, tiny stream of supply back to the manufacturers that's good for 90 hours. Now, the whole thing that was making everyone worried with Y2K was not a global collapse of the system. You don't need a global collapse of the system to create a catastrophe. All right, like Echan, you were just pointing out that in Japan, they've lost a significant percentage of the power that was keeping the lights on in Tokyo, and now they're going to have to put. And in terms of Y2K, what everybody was worried about is, imagine you have a fabulous banquet on the table, and just somebody comes in with a chainsaw and cuts out one of the legs. Okay? Now you got 3 good legs, but one's missing. What happens? Table tips over, and everyone's eating their banquet off the floor. And that is what would have happened in Y2K if the preparation and all the work had happened. You just lost a few key systems, and then these incredibly complex chains of automation would begin failing. Worse yet, we don't have manual switches in the railroads. All of the railroads use computerized switches. So in a full-blown Y2K, totally unprepared situation, we could have wound up with half of the produce of the country rotting on abandoned railway sidings. And that was why all of these companies were, and these people do not like writing checks, and they were spending huge percentage, up to 17% of their overall budgets for IT, just to make sure this didn't bite them. And what amazed me was Y2K was an unparalleled, unprecedented success in terms of preventing a catastrophe. And the result of that was we had guys like Bill O'Reilly going on Fox screaming, off with their heads, they promised us a disaster, they didn't live, we were inconvenienced. These awful people need to be horribly punished. And the people that had saved the nation from an economic crisis comparable to what happened in the 2008 recession were hauled up before Congress in showboat investigations and hearings and lambasted when they should have been getting ticker tape parades. And so I saw that, and now I'm seeing the exact same things coming back. They fixed Y2K, but the basic vulnerability is still there. We live in a world that is connected not by pipes, but by strings. And our economies can snap ever so easily. And so with what's happening in Japan, I see more of this coming downstream. What about you, Echan?
Well, the banks, the Mizuno Bank, which is one of the main banks in Japan, had a temporary shutdown involving all of the ATMs around the country, I believe, and inconvenienced millions and millions of people, but they quickly got back online. So I really hear what you have said. It is, you don't need to have a full-blown catastrophe to actually unhook the system from normal shelves full situation. And each one of these events, you know, Y2K, as you said, was a warning, but then it was, oh, you cried wolf, and everything's going to be fine now in the future. I think it's this head in the sand that we have to fix. And actually, with incredible, impeccable timing, I just see 3 Japanese people arriving at my front door who are going to be, as local Canadian residents, the Japanese who've come here to live. They've just arrived to be the first people to write in the Book of Hope. So I'm going to have to sign off pretty soon, my friend. Maybe we can have a few closing comments before I go down and film these people signing the book.
Oh, well, I mean, that's fabulous, and we hope to get that, and I want to put it up on YouTube. Echan, tell my listeners out there, what are they going to expect next? When do we hook up the next time? You know, I could just see us having another conversation while you're sitting in the departure lounge at the airport and interviewing people there who are like you, flying back into the radiation. Give us a look forward. What can the listeners expect?
I'm leaving in a week for Japan. Between now and then, I have to do a lot of connecting with people over there to arrange for events. I must say that I'm very fortunate in that the people of a small town in southern Kyushu called Yanagawa have rallied their support for me and have actually made it possible for me to fly over there by helping me financially in advance for an event that I should have been paid for later, so that I can fly over there. That's point number 1. Incredible Japanese support. They want me to come. I will do my work. In a week, I will leave. So what I can say right now is that I'll be carrying my sturdy Panasonic Toughbook computer on this trip. I don't think my Acer is going to be able to keep up with me. And I'll also have an iPhone. So I'm literally, the Panasonic Toughbook, there's Japanese technology for you. You can drop this from a meter, and it's guaranteed not to fail you. It's tremendously tough.
Oh, yeah, they're tough.
So they're brilliant. So I will be taking an iPhone and a computer with me, of course. I will be recording and putting things on YouTube, which you can link to. But as far as our radio connections go, any place I can get an internet connection, and I know Vancouver International Airport, I can do that. We can at least have a short chat. I'll bring you up to speed on what's happened in the week intervening. And once I'm on the ground in Japan, first of all in Tokyo, I want to go and meet people from a very large peace foundation who do work internationally. they've expressed their interest in signing the Arise Japan Book of Hope. And from there, I will move to Kyushu. I'll go down south, get the motorcycle, and start wending my way up towards the disaster area, which I think will take me a couple of weeks. So by mid-April, at the latest, I want to be smack in the middle of the disaster zone, reporting on what's happening, helping out as I can, and most importantly, giving this book, which by then will probably be 100, 200 pages full of people's comments, giving it to the people there as stage one of my individual efforts to do the ongaishi, which is how we started the program, paying back the many kindnesses I have been shown. And we'll keep in regular touch. There's going to be all kinds of people showing up on the show because I'll be right there, and I'll be able to interpret for those who can't speak English. So should be fun, and I really appreciate the fact that you are there for us, Marshall, with this show, so that you can put the word out in North America to many of your listeners. And it's like everything that we've been talking about these many years about the shifts are here and now. And it's no longer a prediction or a prophecy. It's a fact that we're in the thick of massive changes, and we have to change our consciousness. And as you said, get ahead of so that we're not victims, so that we are people who see where we are and when we are in time, and we're ready for the next wave, whatever it may bring us.
Absolutely. And, man, my hopes and prayers are with you, and I'm also so inspired by this.
I was in Tokyo 6 days before the disaster struck. I then returned to Canada, and as this unfolded, I decided last week that I have to get back in there and do what I can to help, and so I'm leaving in 7 days from now with an idea of how I can be of assistance to the people right now.
What inspired you to do this?
In Japanese, we have a wonderful expression, Marshall. It is ongaishi. And I suppose the best way to translate that would be to repay kindnesses that have been shown to me. And in Japanese society, it's taken as a completely natural response to situations that you will immediately pay people back for what they've done to you, even if it's 20 years ago. And in my case, it's 37 years worth of payback time, because they have been a wonderful part of my life and continue to be. I've received so much from the people of this country over these close to 4 decades. And if there was any time now that I had to do the ongaishi, which is payback, well, it's certainly now. So I just couldn't miss the meaning of that, and so I made the decision last week, and we're all hot to trot now.
Excellent, excellent. And tell us a little bit about the preparations that you're making on that.
Welcome to Blog Talk Radio. If you
the
desire
idea,
to speak, please press 1 at any time, and you are now in the host.
I'm getting a welcome to Blog Talk Radio feedback loop in my ear right now. I don't know why that's happening. Can you hear that?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but I was getting the welcome to Blog Talk Radio feedback loop there for a second. I don't know why, but I'm fine now. Yeah, it's disappeared. The idea here, Marshall, is very simple. I do have a certain amount of influence in the society there because I'm a public speaker and a writer, and have used the media a lot in my years there. And so I want to do a project which I call Arise Japan, because what people need now more than anything else is hope and inspiration. Of course, supplies, water, food. There are plenty of other people doing that. But because I'm a foreigner, I have a unique ability here to get attention given to me simply because I'm not Japanese, and I do speak Japanese. So the plan is to do a series of talks and events starting in the southern island of Kyushu, where our listeners may know we've had some volcanic activity recently, for example. It's all part of this ring of fire lighting up, I believe. And what I want to do is get on a motorcycle and actually dramatize it by having a flag that has a Japanese sun symbol on it. That's their flag, which simply says in Japanese, Arise Japan. And so you're going to have this unusual-looking person on a motorcycle moving up the country, inching his way towards the disaster zone, collecting enough funds to keep myself going along the way, doing public lectures and talks. And at every talk, I'll have this massive black book, which is, let's call it the Book of Hope. And all of the people who come to these events will then write something in that book that is aimed to deeply inspire the people that it will finally be delivered to, who will be the people in the absolute center of the disaster area, whom I plan to personally hand it to as a gift of hope and say, here is what your fellow Japanese are saying about their desire to support you. Here are their drawings, their paintings, their ditties, their whatever people want to put in it. And among those people, hopefully, we'll have people from all walks of life, including very well-known people, and including Jimmy and Mary in the street. And it will be given to a representative, maybe a mayor or maybe a shopkeeper in one of the really devastated areas, just as a symbol that, hey, all of these people care, and they believe, as I do, that like the firebird, the Hinotori in Japanese mythology, it will rebirth itself out of the ashes, and Japan will start anew. So Arise Japan is the name of the project, and that's how I want to carry it out.
Wow, this is so needed. You know, one of the things that I have been so profoundly inspired and impressed by is how the Japanese people, the whole nation, has dealt with this. We don't see all of the whining and complaining and finger pointing from the public. They're angry. They obviously haven't been getting a lot of the straight scoop. But I think the whole world has looked at it and said, God, if something like that happens here, I hope we have what it takes to respond to it as the Japanese are. I mean, they're really showing us how to cope with the catastrophe.
That's exactly what I think, Marshall. They have become the role model par excellence for the worst imaginable series of catastrophes that, no nightmare could cook up three like this. First earthquake, then tsunami, and then the threat of radioactive problems arising from the reactors, all of these coming one after another in very short succession. It's like getting a body blow, an uppercut, and then an invisible bogeyman from behind is coming at you, and that would be the radioactive fallout that people are talking about. So here we have an exemplar. So for me, the Japanese are heroes. I don't see them as victims. I see them as heroes because they're showing the way for what could very well be a scenario that is replayed in other countries as the Earth goes through her dramatic shifting that you and I both know has been a long time in the coming and now seems to be in high gear. So they are the model, the role model. And I know it's difficult for people to completely adopt a way of life and thinking that's taken them thousands of years of their society to get to, but we can be inspired. And let's say we're in a disaster and we're having a thought, maybe I'll just nip into that shop and just help myself, but whatever. Maybe because of them, we'll go, wait a minute. Remember the Japanese, they didn't do that. They didn't start looting. They stayed in line. They didn't start screaming and yelling at their government should be doing this or that. That's the role model I think they are, and they can do it because they're Japanese, and they've had a long training to do that.
They've had a long training to do that, and but I've always been, Echan, and through all of the years that we've known each other, I've always been deeply impressed with the Japanese people, particularly in the topics of earth changes, catastrophism, Planet X, and 2012. And while I've appeared on national television here in the United States, the first time I ever appeared on national television anywhere was in Japan. And
That's right.
I've always been. That's right, and it was with you, and that show went into reruns, forever. I mean, it was almost like the next best thing to I've Loved Lucy, and but I don't know that we were that comedian, but particularly the topic, but the fact that I was really impressed by how the Japanese, they'll look at something, and if it's their cup of tea, if they're interested, they'll investigate it. And they do it in a very sober way. They just don't dive in, look for headlines, and dive out. And if it's not their cup of tea, they don't do what so many other people around the world will do, which is they get fearful and they get caustic and they say nasty things and they do whatever they can do to suppress a conversation. They just simply say, "I'm not interested, thank you," and they walk off.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always been impressed with the way the Japanese they come at things, and they have this incredible amount of tolerance. Where does this come from?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that you have an unbelievably high amount of people living on a very small geographical area. Japan is really a tiny country. And when you have that kind of density of population, it means that, let's say you want to go for a walk on the wild side. It's going to come back to you through the community of people that you're dealing with, which is a very strong social network. It's going to come back in your face very, very quickly. In other words, it's part of daily life to make sure that you keep your own stuff to yourself, because if you start throwing it around at others, your anger, your displeasure, it will very soon come back through this almost telepathically linked network of densely populated people. It will come right back to you, and you will become very quickly a persona non grata in that society. They won't attack you. They won't badmouth you, but there will be a silent refusal, I think, in many cases, to allow you to fully be a part of the society anymore. So it is not in your interests to go out and do something that is going to be harmful to the community at large. So in that sense, it's a very telepathically linked, aware group of people who know that what's good for the group is actually good for the individual, which is something I don't think that we in the West have really got to, where we tend to stress our individuality. But you know, Marshall, the other day I was on another Blog Talk interview where we were praising the Japanese, and one thing that myself and the host both noticed, he's been there 23 years, for me it's closer to 40, was people think that Japanese are not so individualistic as Westerners, that they tend to be all the same, kind of a group consciousness. Nothing could be further from the truth.
They march in
They're
lockstep,
tremendous. Yeah, they're tremendously individualistic people, but they keep it to themselves, and they wait for the right opportunity to share their unique individuality in the correct situation where they're not going to be drowning everybody else out. So we have to explode that myth. They're highly individualistic. They're no different from you or me or anybody else, but they just keep it under wraps better. And that's what they're doing en masse now. They're keeping it under wraps. We need to learn how to do that.
Yeah. You have to do that. You know, as you were talking earlier about being ostracized for doing things that we just do commonly here in the West, did you ever see the movie Avatar? And
which movie was that, Marshall?
Did you ever see the movie Avatar?
Well, of course I saw Avatar, yes.
Okay, remember that there was a great line, and they would, you know, if you were in favor with the people you cared about, you're in favor with your clan, they would see you. And then if you were out of favor, then they didn't see you. And it had nothing to do with the physical, as whether